The lobby of Westland corporate headquarters was polished to a mirror shine, its glass walls reflecting the morning sun like a spotlight. At 7:42 a.m., the building was just starting to fill with the usual blend of rushed assistants and overly confident executives. The janitor arrived early. His name was Charles, mid-50s, quiet, wore a dark green uniform, always pressed. He parked in the back lot as usual, where the loading trucks idled and nobody asked questions. He entered through the side door and pushed his cart down the service corridor. Bleach, rags, mop, gloves. Standard issue. His ID badge clipped to his chest. The morning crew nodded as he passed security, catering staff, maintenance. At 8:15 a.m. he stopped at the executive floor. Top level. Quiet. Too quiet for this early. The board was meeting today. Charles didn't speak. He took his mop, wheeled the cart to the glass meeting room and began cleaning the floor just outside it. At 8:18 a.m. a young man in a slim-cut suit approached. Clipboard. Bluetooth in ear. Impatient. "Sir, you'll need to finish this later," he said, glancing at the mop with mild disgust. "They don't want interruptions this morning." Charles paused. "I was told to clean this hallway before they arrived." "Well," the man said, lowering his voice as if embarrassed by Charles's presence, "they're already here." Charles looked through the glass. 10 suited figures. One empty seat at the head. He nodded. Moved the cart aside. Slowly. The man watched him, frowning. Then, as Charles reached for his rag to wipe the wall plate near the door, another voice called out. "Is that necessary right now? We have board members arriving." A woman this time. Mid-40s, business casual, no patience. Charles said nothing. Just stepped back. He wasn't cleaning anymore. He was watching. And what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the meeting about to start would be different from every meeting that had come before. Because the person they'd all been waiting for was already in the room. Quiet. Standing still. Watching who saw him and who didn't. Inside the boardroom, the atmosphere was stiff. Leather chairs creaked as people shifted, adjusted papers, checked watches. 9 of them. CFO. Legal counsel. Head of HR, department leads. They were waiting for the consultant. A man named C.J. Ransom, brought in by the board's external auditors to review internal ethics and operations. Rumors swirled, he was ex-military, Harvard-trained, maybe both. No one had seen his photo. He'd insisted on discretion. Outside, Charles leaned against his cart, eyes trailing over the closed door. He heard snippets of conversation. "I heard he worked for the State Department. Probably going to slash half the departments. Who brings in a consultant without looping in senior management?" The man with the clipboard stepped out again, saw Charles still there. "I thought I told you this isn't the best time." Charles looked up at him. "I'm aware." The man frowned. "Then why are you still here?" Charles didn't answer. He just picked up a clipboard from his cart. Not the cleaning log. A different one. He flipped it open, scanned a note, then said calmly, meeting start time was set for 8:30. "Exactly," the man said, checking his watch. "It's 8:26. Charles nodded. "Then I'm not late." The man's brow furrowed. "What?" Charles stepped past him, pushing open the boardroom door. Inside, the conversations halted. All eyes turned to the janitor. Or what they thought was a janitor. Charles didn't flinch. He stepped inside, closed the door behind him, walked to the head of the table, pulled the chair out, sat down. One man near the end of the table, an older VP, half rose from his chair. "Excuse me, this room is reserved for a confidential meeting." Charles met his eyes, calm as ever. "I know. That's why I'm here." A silence fell over the room. He opened the clipboard, pulled out a folded letter, placed it on the table, slowly slid it toward the legal counsel. She hesitated, unfolded it. "Read the top line." Her face changed. Not confusion. Recognition. Shock. Charles spoke, not loudly but with a weight that settled over everyone in the room. "My name is Charles Ransom. You've been waiting for me." He didn't need to say more. The silence that followed was thicker than any rebuke. For a long second, no one moved. The legal counsel, Marissa, stared at the letter as if it might dissolve under her gaze. Her hand trembled slightly, but she passed it down the table without a word. The CFO, Patel, read it next. His jaw set, the paper crinkling as he gripped it harder than necessary. Then he, too, looked up at Charles. At C.J. Ransom. Still, no one spoke. Finally, the man in the navy suit, Thomas Hale, head of operations, leaned forward, fingers steepled. His tone was measured, but there was a trace of condescension curling at the edges. "Mr. Ransom," he said, pronouncing the name like it didn't quite fit. "I think there's been some confusion. We were told to expect an external consultant, specialist in ethics review and cultural analysis." Charles didn't blink. "That's correct. You're the consultant?" Thomas asked, like the word didn't belong to a man in work boots. Charles nodded once. "I've been observing your company for 6 weeks. Undercover as requested. That word, undercover, hit like a small explosion in the room. Thomas laughed once, short and unsure. Come on. What, you've been mopping floors and taking notes? Yes, Charles replied evenly. And listening, watching, documenting. Across the table, someone muttered, "This is ridiculous." Charles turned slightly, gaze calm but direct. What's ridiculous is how many senior managers talk freely in front of someone they assume doesn't matter. That silenced the room. He opened the folder again, removed a thin stack of documents, spread them carefully in front of him. This, he said, gesturing to the top page, is a list of internal policy violations I personally witnessed. 16 incidents. 11 of them involved direct reports being belittled, ignored, or pressured to stay silent. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He flipped the page. This is a log of comments made by leadership in shared spaces. Some are discriminatory. Some are unethical. All were unguarded. Eyes dropped. Bodies shifted. A few jaws tightened. I've been in this building every day since May 12th, he said quietly. And most of you never once asked my name. The silence that followed Charles's last sentence wasn't empty. It was loaded. Guilt, disbelief, some faint thread of fear winding its way around the room like smoke. Patel, the CFO, leaned forward, his voice soft but strained. If you believed something inappropriate was happening, why didn't you report it sooner? I did, Charles said. 3 times, through the anonymous hotline. Nothing changed. He looked directly at Marissa. Legal flagged them as low priority, according to the internal email chain from May 28th. Her lips parted. No words came out. Charles didn't press, just flipped another page. Entry-level staff refer to this floor as the glass cage. That's what they call it when no one listens unless you have a badge and a blazer. You know how I know that? Because when you push a mop bucket and keep quiet, people talk around you like you're invisible. He paused. But I wasn't. Thomas Hale shifted uncomfortably. Look, I think we need to take a step back here. If there's a report to be made, then fine. Let's do it properly. Let's follow protocol. You mean, Charles said, the protocol that let all of this happen in the first place? Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it. Marissa finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. Can we see the full report? Charles nodded. He pulled a flash drive from his folder and slid it across the table. Everything's on here. Names redacted, recordings archived. You'll find transcripts, dates, times, witness logs. I didn't come here with claims. I came with evidence. He leaned back, folding his hands in front of him. The board will receive the same packet by noon. You'll have the rest of the day to decide how you want to be remembered. A chill passed through the room, because what had started as a surprise was now a reckoning. No one reached for the flash drive. It just sat there, dead center on the table, like it carried something dangerous, which, in a way, it did. Charles didn't push it. He just waited. People who hold power often struggle when it's no longer theirs to direct. And in that moment, the room was full of people suddenly unsure of their place. Patel was the first to speak again, quieter this time. What exactly did you see, Mr. Ransom? Charles turned to him, calm and direct. Would you like the list alphabetically or by severity? A few looked away. Someone cleared their throat. Charles picked up a printed page from his folder. 3 department heads using racial nicknames for hourly staff. HR brushing off a harassment complaint with the phrase, "He didn't mean anything by it." A VP instructing someone to fudge numbers on a report before a quarterly review. He stopped, let the words land. They didn't see me, he said simply. But I saw everything. Thomas was fidgeting now. So you're saying what? That this company's corrupt? That we're all bad people? I'm saying you let a culture grow, Charles replied, where this behavior wasn't just tolerated. It was normal. He looked across the table. I mopped your floors. I cleaned your offices. I replaced toner in your printers. I held the door open for you. And not once did you stop to wonder if the person doing those things might be watching you with clearer eyes than anyone else. Marissa leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Why not reveal yourself sooner? Charles paused. His voice dropped a little but never lost its calm. Because you don't learn what people are really like when they know they're being watched. Outside, the elevator dinged softly. Inside, no one moved. The room wasn't angry. Not yet. Just exposed. And there's a quiet kind of panic that comes with exposure. When the light shifts and suddenly everyone's remembering what they said, who was nearby, who might have heard. Thomas Hale spoke again, but the edge in his voice was gone now, replaced by something brittle. So what happens now? You send this to the board and we all get fired. Charles shook his head. Not my job to decide your fate, but you're delivering the report. Yes. With recommendations, Charles said. I don't believe in tearing things down without offering a way forward. He leaned forward slightly. But change starts with admitting what's broken. Patel rubbed his temples. And if we don't? Then the board will. Marissa finally picked up the flash drive, held it between her fingers like it weighed more than plastic. You recorded conversations? Only in public spaces, Charles said. Elevators, break rooms, hallways. All legally. All documented. A pause. Then, you were watching all of us? Charles didn't flinch. No. I was watching how you treated people you thought didn't matter. The words settled heavy. No shouting. No defensiveness. Just the slow erosion of certainty. A junior VP at the end of the table, the youngest in the room, finally spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Did I do anything? Charles turned his head gently toward her. No. You were respectful. To everyone. Even when no one was watching. She exhaled. Quiet. Almost ashamed. Not because she was afraid, but because she realized that being decent had become the exception. The room began to shift. Not physically, just in tone. The kind of shift that happens when people stop defending themselves and start calculating what comes next. Patel leaned back in his chair, arms crossed now. Not confrontational, just bracing. So what exactly are your recommendations? Charles didn't look at his notes. He didn't need to. First, mandatory ethics and bias training for all leadership. Not the kind you click through online. Real sessions. In person. With consequences for skipping. No one interrupted. Second, he continued, an independent ombudsman to handle employee complaints. Someone outside the current chain of command. Too many reports have been rerouted or buried. Someone near the door shifted uncomfortably. Third, Charles said, leadership evaluations will now include feedback from staff 3 levels below. Anonymous. Unfiltered. Thomas scoffed softly. You're giving janitors the power to review executives now? Charles didn't blink. I'm giving people a voice. What you do with it is your choice. The room quieted again. Marissa was still holding the flash drive. Her fingers had stopped fidgeting. And if the board says yes to all this? Charles's response was simple. Then I'll stay on for 3 months to oversee implementation. Patel frowned. And if they don't? Then I'll publish the findings myself. That landed hard. Someone finally said what others were thinking. That's blackmail. Charles's voice didn't rise. It's accountability. He stood slowly. Not a threat. Just a shift in posture. You've all worked in this building for years. I've worked in it for 6 weeks. And somehow I saw more in that time than you've allowed yourselves to see in a decade. No one spoke. Because deep down, they knew he wasn't wrong. Charles didn't move toward the door. He stayed standing, letting the weight of the last sentence settle like dust on a polished surface. They weren't rejecting his words anymore. They were absorbing them. Marissa finally placed the flash drive on the table. Not in defiance, just carefully. You said something earlier. About being invisible. That we talk around people like you. That true? Charles tilted his head slightly. You weren't talking around me. You were talking through me. Like I was part of the wall. And no one questions the wall. No one laughed. Patel spoke next, carefully. So what happens to the people you documented? The ones who crossed a line. They'll be given the chance to respond, Charles said. And the chance to change. But some things, he paused, some things don't get second chances. Thomas shifted in his chair, hands clasped now. I suppose this is the part where we all apologize? Charles gave the faintest shrug. Apologies aren't the point. Awareness is. He walked to the window. Looked out over the city skyline. When he turned back, his voice was calm. Most of you built your careers on being seen, being heard. But the people who make this company run, the ones whose names you never learned, they built it on being overlooked. Silence again. Then the youngest VP, her voice still soft, but steadier now, asked, why did you take this job, Mr. Ransom? Why bother with all of this? Charles looked at her. No smile. Just a quiet truth. Because I got tired of watching good people quit while bad ones got promoted. He paused, then added, I came here to hold up a mirror. What you see in it, that's up to you. They didn't speak for a while after that. A few shifted papers around. One man coughed, but no one left the room. Charles returned to his chair but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned on the back of it, observing them the same way he had for weeks. Quietly, carefully, measuring not just their words but their silences. Finally, Marissa broke the quiet. We've all been in meetings where we talk about company values like they're set in stone. But I think we all just saw what happens when you chisel away the surface. Patel nodded. It's not the stone that's broken. It's what we've carved into it. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it wasn't nothing. Thomas still looked stiff, like the words weren't quite making sense yet. So what? We start fresh? Pretend this didn't happen and move on like everything's fine. No, Charles said. You don't pretend. He stepped forward again. You remember. You document. You change policy. You acknowledge what happened, and why no one spoke up sooner. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the room. And then you stop rewarding the silence. The junior VP leaned forward slightly, her voice firmer now. What if people outside this room hear about all this? They will, Charles said. Not because I'll tell them, because they'll feel it. A beat passed. You don't fix a culture by issuing a memo, he added. You fix it by showing people you're not the same company today that you were yesterday. Another silence followed, but this one felt different, less defensive, more like reflection. A soft knock tapped against the glass wall. Everyone turned. A young woman in a navy blouse stood just outside the room, holding a tablet. She looked nervous. Charles recognized her. Her name was Imani. Worked in facilities. Smart. Kept to herself. They'd spoken twice in passing, brief, quiet conversations. But she remembered his face. She wasn't looking at anyone else in the room. Just him. Charles walked to the door, opened it a crack. I can come back later, she whispered, glancing nervously at the executives. Charles shook his head. You're fine. What is it? She hesitated, then leaned in. I heard what you said, about people not being seen. Her voice wavered. I just wanted to say thank you, for noticing, for saying it out loud. Charles met her eyes. You're not invisible. She nodded once, then glanced behind him at the room full of people in suits, all watching now, but saying nothing. They're listening to you, she said. Charles looked back briefly. They are now. She stepped back, gave him a small nod, and turned to go. Charles closed the door and returned to the table. He didn't say anything about what had just happened. He didn't have to. The executives had seen it, and that moment, quiet, brief, real, was more powerful than anything he'd said all morning, because it didn't come from him. It came from someone they'd never once asked for an opinion. Charles didn't return to his seat. He stood at the far end of the table now, arms folded lightly, giving them space. Patel leaned forward again, this time with none of the guardedness he'd shown earlier. You said you'd stay on for 3 months. As what, exactly? Advisor, Charles said. Internal reform. Culture restructuring. Quietly if needed. Or not. Thomas frowned. And you want a title? A budget? No, Charles replied. I want access. I want to walk the floors without an escort. I want meetings with frontline staff, not just managers. I want the people at the bottom of the org chart to be heard. He paused. And I want the ones who've been protecting the broken parts of this system to be removed. Quietly, professionally, but definitively. Marissa gave a slow nod, the tension in her face finally easing a little. And the board already agreed to this? They know my terms, Charles said. They'll vote by end of day. You can resist it, try to spin it, but you won't stop it. He didn't sound threatening, just certain. One of the senior executives, quiet until now, spoke from the far side. Why us? Charles tilted his head. Why this company? The man clarified. You could have done this anywhere. I didn't choose the company, Charles said. I chose the pattern. Every company has one. But this one left a paper trail. And too many people willing to talk off record, if someone was just willing to listen. He looked around the room. I listened. That landed harder than anything else had all morning. Because they knew he wasn't just referring to conversations. He meant what the company had become. The tone in the room had shifted again. Less combative now, more contemplative. Executives who hadn't spoken at all earlier were quietly looking at their notes, their hands at the door. Not with fear, with realization. Marissa leaned back slightly, eyes on Charles. You know this isn't just about a few bad decisions or poor oversight. If we accept this, really accept it, everything changes. People will ask questions. They should, Charles said. Thomas exhaled sharply, frustration still lingering. It's easy to judge from the outside. Charles turned to him, calm but clear. I wasn't outside. I was here. Every day. In the elevators. The break rooms. The bathrooms. He glanced down briefly. You know what I heard most often? No one answered. That's just how it is. The words hung in the air. That's the rot, Charles said quietly. Not the mistakes. Not even the abuse. It's the normalization of it. The silence. Patel looked over at Thomas, then back at Charles. And if we say yes? If we let you stay, follow through on your terms? Charles didn't hesitate. Then I'll help you fix it. And I'll do it quietly. Not to protect reputations, but to give you space to prove the change is real. Marissa folded her arms, considering. And if we don't? I'll walk out of this room, Charles said. And by the time you eat lunch, your inboxes will be full. And by dinner, your names will be in more places than you want. No threat in his voice. Just a fact. He paused, then added, you don't get points for surviving the fire. Only for putting it out. The room sat with it. Charles could feel the weight of it, how they were each calculating risk, weighing exposure, trying to decide whether silence could still be bought in a world that was watching more closely than ever. Patel broke the stillness. Let's vote. Marissa nodded. Agreed. Thomas hesitated. Then leaned back, arms crossed. One by one, they gave their answer. Yes. 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 Thomas was last. He looked at Charles. Not angry anymore, just tired. You came in under our noses and made a mockery of this place. Charles said nothing. Thomas shook his head. And somehow I respect that. He exhaled. Yes. It wasn't applause. It wasn't relief. It was the sound of structure shifting. Charles reached into his folder again, placed a small envelope at the center of the table. My contact information. Full report passwords. You'll get a formal memo from the board after their vote. He stepped back from the table. Not with triumph, but with purpose. I'll return Monday. No ceremony. No escort. I'll start where I began, quietly. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Change doesn't start at the top. It starts where people stop pretending not to see what's in front of them. Then he opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Charles walked the corridor without looking back. He passed Imani near the elevators. She gave him a small nod, not just of acknowledgement, but of quiet pride. He returned it. On the lower floors, staff had begun to hear pieces of the morning's meeting. They didn't have details, but something was different. The usual hush around executives had lifted. Whispers moved faster than memos ever could. In the break room, someone muttered, "Did you hear? The janitor's running things now." Another voice corrected, he was never just the janitor. On the third floor, a supervisor paused before reprimanding a junior employee, then said instead, "You doing okay?" It caught them both off guard. But it stuck. In the HR office, Marissa was already typing up the first policy review notice. No one had asked her to yet. But something in her posture had shifted. In the executive lounge, Thomas stared at his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows for a long time before saying quietly, "We've got work to do." Back upstairs, Charles exited the building through the same service door he'd used for 6 weeks. No fanfare. Just a nod from security as he passed. But the nod was different now. Not the kind they gave a cleaner. The kind they gave someone who mattered. And Charles didn't smile, because it was never about being seen. It was about what people would choose to see now. The following Monday, 7:45 a.m., Charles entered through the front. No mop. No cart. No uniform. Just a navy blazer, dark slacks, a quiet stride, and the same calm presence. Reception fell silent when they saw him. Not out of fear. Not anymore. Just awareness. He gave a brief nod, and the receptionist, who had never asked his name before, said softly, "Good morning, Mr. Ransom." He nodded. "Morning, Elena." The elevator ride was quiet. When he reached the executive floor, the glass walls didn't feel like a cage anymore. They felt like windows. Transparent, fragile, finally honest. He walked into the same meeting room. Marissa was already there. Patel arrived moments later, followed by 2 junior staffers, new faces invited for their first seat at the table. Thomas came in last. He didn't say much, but he took the last chair without looking for a different one. Charles opened a folder. We start with accountability reviews. Then we talk about culture reporting and how to measure change that actually means something. No one interrupted. They just listened. Because something had shifted, not just policy, but posture. Across the building, someone vacuumed a hallway. In the mailroom, a worker sorted envelopes by hand. In the cafeteria, a cook wiped down a counter no one else would notice. But someone might now. Someone would notice. Because once invisible things become seen, they can't be unseen. And Charles wasn't there to be the hero. He was there to make sure that silence never ruled the room again.